You know, when I was a boy, my favorite movie growing up was Conan the Barbarian. And it took, wow, nearly 20 years later before I really recognized why that movie had such a shift in my life. And if you're not familiar with Conan the Barbarian, Arnold Schwarzenegger's classic movie that really put him on the map, here's basically a little synopsis. So the movie starts out with little Conan as a boy in a village with his father, trying to figure out the riddle of steel. Really, to them, that was like the purpose of life, why people do what they do, like what's really going on. It was like how they worship the gods, was really understanding steel. And throughout this beginning of the movie, you will see that they're in a village and everything is pretty cool. But these men come to the village and ravish the village. They rape the women, they burn everybody, they kill his father, and then two of the last people to be alive are Conan and his mom. And she walks out with little Conan, and James Earl Jones' character, the man who was also in this pursuit of the riddle of steel, of power, with his entire tribe, stands there and looks his mom in the eyes, and right in front of little Conan, cuts off her head. And in that moment, Conan had a vision. He just looked up and he saw this symbol. And it's interesting to know that we might have a lot of experiences in life, but we learn through analogy and symbols. Just like the word swastika mean nothing, Nazi mean nothing to you, but a swastika could bring up emotions, Christ versus the cross. And so he saw this symbol, a black sun, black moon, with two snakes facing each other. And he saw that symbol, and from that moment on, that vision, that experience was ingrained in his mind, and that experience symbolized something to him. And he said that, you know what, I'm going to find this man. And he saw that vision. He had that vision of that snakes, the moon, the sun in his mind every single day. And so what they did is they took all the boys from that little village and they forced them to work. And if you remember from the movie, there's like 100 boys walking through the mountains, and they end up at this camp. And what they're doing, you see them on this large wheel, this wheelhouse. It's like a wheelhouse with all these logs coming out from it. And on each one of these logs, there's about 3 or 4 boys pushing. So there's about 80 boys pushing around. What they're doing is they're grinding grain on what's called the wheel of pain. And so they're pushing and pushing and pushing. And you see little Conan pushing, and you see all the boys pushing, and you see the camera phase out. And then it phases back in, and you see that all the boys are a little bigger, but there's less of them. Some have died off. And then you see it fade out again, and then it fades back in, and now there's even less boys, and all the boys are even bigger. Many more have died off, until eventually it pans down to the eyes of Conan, and you know this, there's one man driving the grain on the wheel of pain, driving the wheel, pushing and pushing and pushing. And what happens is this: they see that he has this talent. He's become a massive man, and he's just such a physical specimen. So they take this man with all this desire in his heart and all this strength in his arm, and they start to train him for battle. And they put him into these fights, and they bet on him, and he has no training, but because of the desire in his heart, the symbols in his mind, he dominates. And then they train him with swords, and they train him in martial arts, and they train him, and he becomes a prized warrior. He wins all the battles, and they give him prizes and things like that. He's a slave, he's caged, and they give him women to have sex with and basically birth him with, to mate him with, like an animal. And he lives there like an animal, but his owner ends up having an affection for young Conan and sets him free. And he doesn't know what to do. He's never been free before. And he doesn't know what to do with all that responsibility. See, most people in their life talk about wanting to be free, but they want to be free from or free to. And so there's 3 types of freedom. Freedom to do something, that's focused on the future. You're not here. Focused freedom from the past, freedom, financial freedom, and then there's just freedom. But he was greeted with this freedom one day of being out of slavery. But there was a new sense of freedom that he wanted to have, freedom in his mind, of the plagued experience that was inside of him that had been driving him for all those years. He said, what do I do now? And he went out there and he started to look for the symbol. He looked for the man that had killed his family, killed his father, killed his mother. And so he searches and searches and searches, and he meets some people along the way. But what happens is this: he eventually finds Thulsa Doom, James Earl's character, and he goes after him, and he is captured. And while he's captured, they basically talk about what happened that day when James Earl Jones' character, Thulsa Doom, killed his village. And he said, that's when I was after the riddle of steel. But he says, you know what the riddle of steel really is? What it comes down to is this. He says, steel is strong, but flesh is stronger. What is steel? What is steel compared to the hand that yields it? the desire in our hearts. And so what happened was this. He sets, Conan out into the wilderness, out into the desert, and he gets him to contemplate all of this on the tree of woe. They leave him to die, and he's being eaten by buzzards. But then something magical happens. His friends, the people that he's met along his journey, come and save him. And you see, we all need help sometimes along the way. And he laughs, and they bond, and then they help him in fulfilling his mission. But here's the interesting thing. He trains, he sees warriors, he's going out there, and he's really got this mindset, and he's going to make this dream happen. And what happens is this, something very powerful in this moment, once I got it, is what completely changed my life. And they had a movie called Conan the Barbarian. See, what happened was this. There's now thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people worshiping this man, Thulsa Doom, mindlessly following this leader who has been obsessed with power. And this man's very charismatic, and you see this pan out of all these thousands of people following this man, speaking on top of the mountain, looking down on the people and talking, and all of them hold this candle, and they're worshiping this man, worshiping his philosophy. And so Conan, what he does is he gets himself all war painted up, and then he sneaks up the backside of the mountain, and he is there, and he can see Thulsa Doom. He can see him speaking from behind. He can see him, and he has his sword drawn, and he's walking up, and he's about to kill Thulsa Doom. He's about to overcome this. His whole life's purpose has been for this one moment, to come after this man. And what happens is this: James Earl Jones, his character, feels the energy, feels the intensity in his eyes, feels the energy of Conan coming up behind him, and he turns, and he locks eyes, and he says, my son, welcome. He welcomes him. No fear, no opposition. He welcomes him. And Conan's confused. To confuse your opponent is often more powerful than overpowering. When we come at that inferior frame, say, I don't know, what do you think? And so what he does is he took away his power, not by combating. That didn't give him the fight that he was looking for, but he came inferior and said, my son. And he tried to bond with Conan. And Conan, being confused, like, what are you talking about? Looks at Thulsa Doom, and Thulsa Doom says, look at the desire in your heart, the strength in your arm, the power in your sword. I gave you this. Without me, you would be nothing. And right then, as so many of us have realized, and as Conan realized that day, that sometimes it's the anger and the fear and the frustration that drives us in life. But there comes a moment where we have to let some of that go. And Conan realizes right then that without this man and without the tragedy, without all those tragedies, he would not have built that strength. And so James Earl Jones says, my son, who would you be without me? You would be just like all those followers. But you're a strong man, my son. And Conan, realizing this, that, wow, this is what's made him, he starts to drop his sword. He becomes soft in his eyes. And James Earl Jones makes his move to console Conan. But then, all of a sudden, he wakes up, he snaps out of it. And he takes his sword and he cuts off the head of Thulsa Doom. He cuts off the head of James Earl Jones' character. And what happens is this: he picks it up, then he takes that head, that severed head, and he tosses it down at the people. In shock, they don't know what to do. They end up walking over to a well and taking each one of those candles that they were burning for that false leader, and they put them in the well. And then they go off to live their lives. And Conan becomes the greatest king and warrior of all time. So what does this mean to you and I? It just means that we've all had challenges and problems in our life. And so being able to reframe the situation and be able to understand what is driving us, but knowing that the things that are driving us sometimes could be imprisoning us, we need to cut off what it is that has stopped us and really understand ourselves, and then we can become warriors. We can become kings. We can become the change that we want to see in the world.